To make. This is Eastside's month at the food cupboard, and you've heard me talk about that. Tomorrow is going to be a food drive at the food cupboard. And so they're asking for any of us that are able or that can or that have the time to show up somewhere between 10:30, 10:45. If you have to show up later, hang out, whatever you can do, they need all the hands they can get. And basically what I understand is you're going to sort food. So if you can put a can on a shelf, you are able to be a part of this and help to feed the hungry of Scurry County. So check your schedule, see what you can do. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at the food cupboard. If you're visiting with us, let me tell you what you've stumbled into. We are in the beginning phases of a study of 1 Peter. And we're calling that alienation because over and over, at least 3 times in the first section of 1 Peter, he calls the people that he is talking to aliens. And he uses that word. Some translations render it exiles. Some translations render it strangers. Some translations render it sojourners. But the word means an alien. It means someone who is living in a place that they don't belong. And that's how he's addressing the people. He's telling them, as we saw in the beginning section of the first chapter, he's telling them, you are aliens. You don't belong in this world. This is not your home. And he says, you are called to a new hope. And that new hope is through a new birth, that you will become a new creation in Jesus. And so that's where we are. That's where we're going to start off this morning. If you have your Bibles or a phone or whatever, David, couldn't resist. Go ahead and fish that out. We're in chapter 1. We're going to start about verse 13. Chapter 1 of 1 Peter, verse 13. Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. Peter says you're aliens, you're exiles, you don't belong here. You live here, but you're different. You're from a different culture. You're something different. And then comes the big therefore. Therefore, because you are aliens, therefore, focus on that hope. Focus on the grace of Jesus. That's your hope. That's your focus. That's what we're supposed to be about. That's the therefore. Focus on the grace of Jesus, and then when you do that, you're going to be different from the world. You're going to be set apart. You're going to be holy. That word there, we have problems with that word holy because we read that and we think perfect. And we say, Peter is calling us to be perfect and to maintain some kind of perfect morality. But that's not the case. The word there is hagion, which literally means set apart. It means different. It means different because you're like the Lord. And so he's saying, he's keeping that alien theme going, that in your time here in this world where you don't belong, you're going to be set apart. You're going to be put aside, not because just that you don't fit in this world, but because you're like God. And when you're like God, when you focus on that hope and that grace of Jesus, you're going to be different from the world around you. And so as aliens, as different set apart beings, you're going to live your lives in fear. This weekend we were down in Austin, Texas with my family, and we went into a Whole Foods. Now, if you don't know what Whole Foods is, it's like the hipster United, okay? If you want some kind of weird food that nobody's ever heard of, they've got it, and they've got multiple brands of it. And we're walking through Whole Foods, which is it's an amazing store. It's huge, it's massive, it's got all kind of things that I didn't even know existed. And we're walking around there, and my little redneck Snyder, Texas kids in Austin, Texas, in Hipster United. You can imagine what this looks like, okay? And they're walking around like this. Because Allie says to me, Daddy, these people all look like they're on The Amazing Race. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, they're dressed like it, they've got weird hair like that, and they're all walking really, really fast. Because in the grocery store in Snyder, Texas, nobody walks fast, right? Y'all may have been there. But we were different. Hillary says to me, I really feel like a redneck in this place. And I said, show your neck, baby. Own it. Don't be afraid. It's okay. It's okay. That's what Peter's saying here. You're different from this world. You're not the same. You don't fit in. And it's okay. Be different. Be set apart. Be holy. That's what he wants you to do. And then he says, live your time here in exile in fear. Now we hear that and we say, oh my goodness. You know, I've said this before, I was talking to a friend of mine, we were talking about what the greatest threat facing the church today was. And his response was fearful Christians. That we want to cloister ourselves in our little holy fortresses and hide out from the big bad world. That fear is not. The word here is phobos, and phobos is like this. When I was a kid, my grandmother would send me out to the chicken coop to get eggs. Yes, I am a redneck. And I would go out there and I would reach in to get the eggs. And occasionally you would reach in to get the eggs and you would grab a hold of something scaly that moved. Right? And then you would generally go, ah! And pull away. Now then you'd pick it up and go put it on your brother. But the first part, you pull away. It's just reflex. You can't help it. That's the fear he's talking about. Phobos, pulling away. You see his thought process that's still going, right? We're living as aliens who are set apart, pulling away from the world during our time of sojourning. We don't use that word much anymore. Well, Roland does, but the rest of us don't. Sojourning is journeying through a strange land. And so that's what he's saying here in this whole thing. He's still keeping this alien picture going. That we're going to be different from the world as aliens, living in fear. Peter says, you don't belong here, so quit acting like you do. Stop trying to fit in. This is not middle school. You remember middle school? I taught junior high for a number of years. I love teaching junior high kids, and here's why. Because they are trying to figure out where they fit, right? They're wearing a different hat every day. They may be a rapper one day, and a cowboy the next day, and a preppy the next day, and a jock the next day. Am I right? Come on. Some of you teachers, you know what I'm talking about. They're trying on everything because they don't really know who they are, and they haven't been branded yet. They haven't gotten locked into an identity yet. And so they're trying everything they can to fit in, right? You hear people say they want to go back to high school, they want to go back to college. Nobody ever says, man, I wish I could go back to junior high, right? That's that kind of time. Peter says, quit trying to fit in. Quit trying to be like this world because it's not going to happen. You're not like this world. You're different. Verse 22. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart. Since you've been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and abiding Word of God. Peter is anticipating his readers saying, what does this look like, Peter? And Peter's answer is love. Love each other. You want to know what the answer is, what your alien identity is? You love. from a pure heart, earnestly, for real. Not some kind of nonsense fake love, not some kind of made up stuff. We get rid of all the nonsense that this world carries and that makes this world go round, and we focus on love, because that love has the power to then transform this world we're being different from. Are you with me? There's a great book called, let me get it right, Through the Valley of the Kwai. It's written by a guy named Ernest Gordon, and it tells of his experiences in a Japanese POW camp during World War II. In this POW camp, the conditions were so horrid. This is an actual picture. The conditions were so horrid that it kind of devolved into a survival of the fittest, okay? And people started dividing into groups. You know, we're real good at dividing, right? We're real good at dividing ourselves, and that's what they started doing. And so the Americans stuck with the Americans, and the English stuck with the English, and so on. All these allies devolved into little cliques, and they only looked out for themselves. Until a guy named Angus MacGillivray died. Angus was an Argyle. He was a Scottish soldier, and the Scottish were just like everybody else. They clicked into a little group. Except the Scottish, they created a buddy system, and they had a guy that was their responsibility. They called him their mucker, and their mucker was their responsibility. They were supposed to take care of each other. Angus's mucker grew very sick, and he was dying, and everybody wrote him off as dead except Angus. Somebody stole his mucker's blanket. Angus procured another one. Angus would get extra food and smuggle it in to his mucker, and he would make sure he was warmed and fed and cared for. And he did this for months until the other man began to get healthier and he began to be able to get up and around. And Angus was nursing this guy back to health until one day on his way across the camp, Angus passed out and died. And everybody was like, what happened? Because Angus was one of the strong. He was one of the ones who were guaranteed to survive. And in this survival of the fittest pecking order, the strong are the top of the food chain. What happened to Angus? Gradually the word got out. Those extra blankets were Angus's blankets. That extra food was Angus's food. And Angus was so intent on nursing his brother back to health that he died of starvation and exposure. His death transformed that camp. All of a sudden, all these men who had been separated became united around the death of Angus. And they found out that one was a violin maker, and one was a band leader, and one was a doctor, and they began to use their talents and minister to one another. And they created a camp band out of makeshift instruments, and they started a church they called it the Church Without Walls, that was so intense and so engaging that even some of the Japanese soldiers would hang around and listen to what was going on. And the whole camp was transformed from a dog-eat-dog, self-only world into a community by the love of one man. Peter says that's what being holy, different aliens is about. And when we love each other earnestly from a pure heart, it will transform this world. And instead of us trying to find a way to fit into it, that world will be called to transform and become more like Jesus. Greater love is no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Those are the words of Jesus. And Peter is repeating that thought to these people. We're now moving into chapter 2. So put away all malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to Him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. Live in love. Love each other earnestly. Put away the junk of this world. Because what does this world runs on? It runs on malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander. Don't believe me? Pull up Facebook. Not right now, Terry. Put that phone away. Pull up Facebook. And what do you see? Wickedness. That's the word that's translated malice. Guile. You know what guile is? Guile is deceit. That's that next slide, Alan. Or, well, no, one more. Guile, deceit, the bait and switch. If you don't know what catfishing is, ask your kids. It has nothing to do with fish. That deceit of pretending to be one thing, that's the hypocrisy also. Pretending to be one thing and being something else. Envy. Envy is when we look at somebody else and we want to tear them down to make ourselves feel better. Envy. That jealousy that you see purveying. And finally, slander. Slander, when we're saying something about someone else that is in order to defame their name. Come on, don't make me say it. When you forward that thing about Obama, yeah, make sure it's true. When you forward that thing about Trump, those of you on the other side, make sure it's true. Because in the Bible, the word we have translated devil means slanderer. So where do you think that stuff comes from? We would do things and say things on the internet that we will never do in real life, but it shows a heart. And that's the things of this world. Peter says, get rid of all that junk. Put it away and live in love. Live in love, and you're going to be built up into something else. When you get rid of all that junk, you're going to be weaned and you're going to start to grow up. And verse 5, you're going to start to be built up. You yourselves are like living stones being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. This alien culture is going to be built into an alien building, made out of living stones, and we're going to call that thing church. Right? There's a story told that the king of Sparta, way back in the whatevers, I lost the number, was giving a tour to a visiting dignitary, and he kept talking about the walls of Sparta. And this other dignitary kept looking around. He didn't see any walls. And he finally asked, where are these walls? I want to see them. And the king of Sparta points at some of his soldiers standing over there, and he says, behold the mighty walls of Sparta. Because he viewed each one of those soldiers as a brick in the wall that kept out the world. Peter says, you're living stones. You are being built into a spiritual house. That's hard for us to understand, right? It's hard for us to understand that we are the church. Oh, we're good at it. Did you used to do this? You know the little thing? This is the church house. This is the steep. You remember that? I can't do it anymore. This is, okay, ask your kids. You're the church. You're built together as living stones into a new creation. Now, we have a hard time understanding that. We say things like we're going to church. Or the new one is we're going to do church, right? We've kind of made it a place. That's not totally our fault. Some of that is the Bibles that we read and the things that we have. You see, church is not really a scriptural word. There's some people going, wait a minute. Church is not in the original text. That word ecclesia that is translated church means those who are called out. Those who are called out. Still, sounds like Peter, right? Those who are called out. The assembly of those called out. And when I was raised up, we were raised on the King James Version of the Bible, and that was the only authorized version. In fact, in some places that I've served, I've had a gentleman tell me, the King James Version is good enough for Paul, it was good enough for me. You don't know him, but that's a pretty good imitation. I can still hear it. And that was the only official version. And the King James Version was a great translation for its time. Unfortunately, since King James translators didn't have a whole lot to work with, okay? A lot of times they were translating from a translation of a translation. They were translating from Latin, or they were translating from something somebody else had translated. And so they didn't always get it perfect. They did the best they could with what they had to work with, but they didn't get it perfect. They also had to deal with the bureaucracy. Now, nobody's ever dealt with bureaucracy, right? King James was the head of the Anglican Church. And when they came to him, for example, with the word ecclesia and said this means called out, King James said, I don't want people being called out of my church. We already got called out. That's how I became the church, the head of the church in the first place. And so I don't want somebody else being called out and starting their own church. We need to change that. Let's change that word from the called out to the church, because that means a located chapel. And so that's where we started to get it in our head that we can live one way at church and another way at work. That we can come in here and do something because we're in church. But the truth is, church doesn't ever end. Now, there's some of you who are getting worried about that. Oh, no, he just said church. Are you... That's not what I mean. For example, we take our name on the side of our building from Romans 16:16. The churches of Christ greet you. That should read, if you're a person reading that in the original language, it should read, all of those, the assembly of those called by Christ greet you. Now that gives a totally different impression, right? Because what meant those called out by Christ is now a sign on the side of a pile of bricks. There are some who will even say that if that sign is not on your pile of bricks is not authorized. And they're wrong. I don't know how to say it any plainer than that. They're wrong. Because the church has nothing to do with a pile of bricks or the sign on the side of a building. The church are the living stones that are built together to form a spiritual house. That's what Peter says. And what's the purpose of that spiritual house, Peter? What is it here for? What does he say? Go back to the text. What does Peter say is the purpose? Verse 9. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. That, what are you doing? What's the church doing? That you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. What is the purpose of the church? To get together and meet on Sunday mornings? Is the purpose of the church to get together and pool our resources to do this or that? No. The purpose of the church is to proclaim the excellencies of God. You can amen that. Proclaim the excellencies of God. That's it. This spiritual house is built to proclaim his glory. Period. That's what we're here for. We're to proclaim that to a lost and dying world. To bring hope. Sound familiar? To bring hope to a lost and dying world. That's the purpose of church. That's what we're here for. He goes on in verse 11. We're winding up, I promise. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles, there's those alien words again, to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and do what? Glorify God. There's the purpose again on the day of visitation. Peter pulls it all together and says, you're different. You don't belong here. You're separated, you're set apart, you're holy. And as that, own it. Be those people. Be the ones who are called out. Be that holy temple of God, that holy nation, proclaiming his glory to a lost and dying world. That's what you're here for. And as that world looks at you, as that world sees you, They're going to come to Jesus. And instead of us fitting into an alien culture that we're not a part of, this alien nation begins to transform the world around it. That's the point. If you're not a part of that this morning, there is an opportunity for you to be called by Jesus, to be part of Jesus. I can't say it any plainer than that. You don't get into the church by placing membership. You don't get into the church by being led through some kind of miraculous. You get into the church by submitting, surrendering to Jesus. That makes you part of the church. This is an opportunity for you to do that this morning. Maybe this morning you're sitting here and you're going, I need to change. I need to quit trying to fit in and quit trying to be the world and be Jesus. We're going to have people at the back of the room, and they're there simply to pray with you, period. Because we have no authority of our own. We have no power of our own. We have no magic hoodoo or voodoo that will make you anything. But we have an avenue to go before the throne room of the Creator of the universe and lift you up before Him. And He is God. He can do whatever He wants. And so, this time right now, that's what this is for. Response. Respond to God in worship. Proclaim His excellencies. Submit to Him. Cry out to Him. Join with Him in communion. That's what we're going to do. And that's what I encourage you to do right now while together we stand and sing.